I'm about to show you how to make a super simple 6-ingredient pizza dough at home, no kneading required, and I promise this is just as good as any pizzeria. All right, let's start off with your 6 ingredients. Bottled water, olive oil, salt, sugar, dry active yeast, and of course, flour. I'm using King Arthur bread flour for this dough. Bread flour is what you're going to want to use to make pizza dough because it has a higher protein content. It's going to give you a really nice rise and a really nice structure to that dough. All right, so those are the ingredients, and I will go ahead and go over the tools you're going to need, and it's really not much. All I have today are a couple of mixing bowls. All right, I have a cup to help me weigh out my water. I have my scale to help me weigh out all of my ingredients, very important. And I have a spoon to mix everything up. That's it. It's simple, okay? I told you, this is simple pizza dough. All right, so let's get started making the dough. I already have pre-weighed out my flour. It is 439 grams here of King Arthur bread flour. I like to use bread flour when I make my pizza dough. It has a higher protein content, which gives you a little better chew, allows the gluten to develop more, and it gives you more texture and rise in your crust, okay? Now, I weighed this out already to make it easier for me. And then I'm going to go ahead and weigh out all the rest of my ingredients in a separate bowl. I'm going to dump them right into my flour and mix them up. We'll start with the dry, okay? All right, so I've got my bowl here. I've got my scale on. And we will start out with the salt, right? I'm using a kosher sea salt. You can use just about any kind of salt here because we're going to weigh it out. It doesn't matter if it's a different shape. The volume doesn't matter. It's all about the weight, right? So this recipe calls for 9 grams of salt. I'm just going to go right into the bowl. And this is why I use this separate bowl, because I've put in quite a bit too much here. And I'm going to use my spoon to take some out and help me get down to 9 grams. All right, we've got 9 grams of salt now. We're going to go ahead and add our sugar. This recipe calls for 5 grams of sugar. This is just regular white sugar. That's all you're going to need. The sugar acts as a food for the yeast. Okay, the yeast needs something to help activate itself to create all those carbon dioxide bubbles that make your nice bubbly crust. The sugar is going to do that for you. It's also going to add a little sugar content to the dough, which is going to help the dough brown up a little more in your oven. So 5 grams. Go slow, okay? All right, that's it. 5 grams of sugar, done. The next thing that we're going to add is going to be our yeast. This is an active dry yeast. You could use a wet, fresh yeast if you'd like. It'd be a little different process to that, a different amount. Doesn't keep very long, and you got to keep it in the fridge. This lasts a lot longer. You also keep it in the fridge, but it lasts a lot longer than a fresh yeast, okay? So this only uses 1 gram of yeast. It's not very much yeast. It's not very much pizza, just 1 gram, okay? So go slow with this. I'm just going to use the same spoon, scoop it out. I'm going to tare my scale first, all right? If you don't know what that means, I'll make a video specifically about scales later, but that just means I'm setting the weight back to 0 so that I can easily measure just 1 gram. All right, that's it. 1 gram of yeast. A little goes a long way. That's all my dry ingredients other than my flour. I'm going to mix these in here with my flour. Okay, done with this bowl. I'm going to take my spoon. I'm going to mix these dry ingredients up a little bit just to make sure everything's nice and incorporated and I don't have any pockets of anything. All right, that's it. We're going to move on to our water and our oil. Okay, so I'm just going to weigh my water in this cup. You can use any vessel you want as long as it's big enough for the amount of water you need. This recipe, it calls for 299 grams of water. All right, I'm going to go ahead and tare my scale again. 1 button sets it back to 0, and then I can pour my water. This is the most important thing to do separately from your flour, because if you put too much water into your flour, you can't really get it out. All right, we've got our water, and now we need our oil. This is going to be 13 grams of olive oil. All right, so we have our wet ingredients here in the cup, our dry ingredients in the bowl. We're going to go ahead and mix these together with this spoon until it starts to come together, and then just with our hand until we get a nice, loose, shaggy dough ball. I'm going to show you what that looks like. Done with this. All right, I'm just stirring this together to get all the flour and water incorporated together and just get a really rough, loose dough ball. All right, once this starts to come together a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and ditch the spoon. I'm going to use my hands to form this the rest of the way. You can see it starts to stick to the spoon anyways. This gets kind of useless. I'm really just trying to make sure that there's no pockets of dry flour and there's no parts of the dough that are much more wet than any other parts. This is only going to take 30 seconds, less than a minute. All right, it's coming together into a nice, shaggy, very sticky, actually, dough ball. I'm going to go ahead and rinse my hands off and then cover this in a towel. All right, as you can see, this is a very loose, wet dough, very shaggy. This is what we're looking for at this point in the process. What we're going to do now is we're going to cover this bowl up with a towel to keep everything from drying out. We're going to let this rest for about 20 to 30 minutes and let that flour really absorb all of the water. All right, and that's it. We're going to leave it for about 20 to 30 minutes now until our next step. All right, so I told you there's going to be no kneading with this dough, and I meant it. We're going to do instead a technique called the folding technique. All right, so it's been about 20-25 minutes since I first mixed up this dough, and it's just been resting here, absorbing all the water underneath of this towel. And now I'm going to start with the first out of 5 folds that are each going to be about 20 to 30 minutes apart. It's important that they're 20 to 30 minutes apart. This gives the dough time to relax between folds, making it easier to fold the next time. All right, let's get started. It helps if your hands are a little wet to keep the dough from sticking, and I'm going to start with the edge of the dough furthest from me. I'm just going to grab it, pull, stretch, and fold it in on itself. Then I'm going to turn the dough 90 degrees. I'm going to do that again. All right, I'm going to do that. The first time I might do it 4 or 5 times. Each time after that, I'm only going to do it about 4 times. And it'll get harder to do as I go, as the dough builds this gluten. All right, so that's about it. That's about all I'm going to do. You can see it still doesn't look like much, but as I continue to fold this, it's really going to turn into a nice, smooth, elastic dough ball. All right, I'm going to cover it up with my towel now to keep it from drying out, and I'll be back in about 20 minutes to fold it again. All right, it's been about 20 minutes, and it's time to fold again. And remember, a wet hand is going to help this process go a lot smoother. 1, 2, 3. Sometimes you got to get another hand in there. And 4. It's already getting a little tighter. You can see it's turning into a much more cohesive dough ball. And that's it. We'll cover it up for 20 more minutes. All right, we're on the 3rd fold here. 1, 90 degrees. 2, I have to get that second hand in here. This is already getting a little tougher. Starting to develop more gluten. That's what we want. And 4 folds. You can see this is already starting to get a lot more smooth, cohesive, and we're going to let it sit here for another 20 minutes before we do it again. All right, we're moving on to the 4th folding. Again, I'm going to wet my hands again so that this dough doesn't stick to my fingers too bad. I'm going to secure this bowl, maybe the dough, with my other hand. We're going to fold 1, turn it 90 degrees, 2, 3, and try to get that little bit 4 times. There we go. That's getting nice and smooth now. Look at that dough. All right, only 1 more left. We're going to see this dough in 20 minutes. We're going to fold it one last time. All right, it's finally time for our 5th and final fold. All right, we're going to do our 5th fold here. You can see this dough is getting nice and smooth and elastic here. Got 1, 2, 3, and 4 folds. All right, it's been about 20-25 minutes since our 5th and final fold, and now it's time to move on to the storage and fermentation stage. So our dough is ready for the bulk fermentation stage. The bulk fermentation stage is when the dough ferments in one large dough ball in the refrigerator. Usually I'm going to give it about 24 hours for this fermentation. So I'm going to use this glass container to ferment in the fridge. You could also use like a large Tupperware or even another large bowl, as long as it's anything that has at least 3 times the volume of the size of your dough ball right now, because this dough ball is going to grow and expand while it is in the refrigerator. So take whatever container you're going to use. This doesn't have a super tight lid. Keep that in mind. If you use something like a jar and you crank it down tight, this dough is going to be creating gas and it could explode, honestly. So if you're going to use a jar or something with a really tight lid, leave it cracked. Maybe don't spin the jar lid on all the way. A Tupperware is okay because it'll just pop the corner off, but a lid on a jar could be dangerous. So any container that you're going to use, you're going to want to use a little olive oil to grease up the sides. I'm just going to spread it around with a paper towel inside of here, because I don't really want my dough sticking too bad. All right, that should be plenty. And then I'm just going to take my dough. I'm going to get it out of the bowl here. Oh, it's a nice looking dough. All right, and then it just goes straight into the container. Not very sticky anymore. It's nice and elastic and smooth. I'm going to put my lid on, and you're going to see in 24 hours, this is really going to puff up quite a bit. So pop it in the fridge, and we'll see you in about 24 hours. All right, it's time for the final step in our dough making process. It's been 24 hours. Actually, it's been a little over that. And the tools we're going to be using today are olive oil. I got my proving containers here. I'm going to need a scale for this. I also have a little wax sheet here to keep the dough from sticking to the scale. It's not really necessary, but it's just nice to have. And I have a dough cutter and, of course, my dough. You can see how much this has risen here in the container. It's probably about double, maybe not quite double of what it was when I went in there. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the dough out of the container, and I'm going to divide it into my dough balls. Now, if you remember, this should make about 3 250-ish gram dough balls, make 3 12-inch pizzas. So let me just lay it right here on the board. I'm going to turn my scale on, get my wax sheet ready, my dough cutter, and I'm going to just eyeball off about a third of this. Check it out. We're at 296, a little too much. I can just rip a little bit off of it. 274, rip a little more off. 254, that's pretty close. I'm going to go with that. All right. So our remaining dough should be about half. We're at 253, right on the money. And just check this final dough ball. It's a little smaller, actually, 230. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to cut a little bit off of each of these and add it on. And up to 246, we're probably close enough to 3 equal-sized dough balls now. We're done with the cutter. We're done with the scale. We're done with the wax sheet. And now we need to form our dough balls. Now, this is the tricky part here, and it's important to get right. So go ahead and practice this as much as you need. Maybe watch this video a couple of times, at least this part. I'm going to start now with the dough ball. I'm going to fold in the edges sort of underneath. I'm pushing all the dough underneath, forming it into a ball shape, rotating it in my hands as I go. And you can see it's nice and smooth on top. It shouldn't tear. You shouldn't be pulling it too hard. Just gently pulling it underneath from the edges. And then once it's getting into a ball shape, I'm just going to pinch it with I'm right-handed. I'm going to use my right hand to pinch together the bottom, keep rotating it while I do this. And it's sort of sealing this dough ball into a nice circular shape. I can use my thumb here a little bit if I want, or just my fingers. It doesn't have to be perfect. You'll get a feel for it the more you do it. And that's it. We have a dough ball. I'm going to do this 2 more times. Again, I'm just working the edges around. As I turn the dough ball, I'm also pushing the edges up and underneath to form a ball. Then I'm pinching it with my right hand while I continue to rotate it. Pinch it up a little more. You can see what the bottom looks like at this point. It's a little rough. That's fine. Just going to turn it just like that and go to number 3. You can see if I pull too hard, this tears. You don't want to pull too hard. You just want to be gentle. You're not stretching the dough. You're just shaping it. Pinch it closed with the right hand. There we go. All right, we have our 3 dough balls ready, and now all we have to do is place them in their separate proving containers. I have 3 small containers here with lids. You could use a bowl if you'd like with some saran wrap over the top. Preferably anything round. The round container is going to help this dough maintain a round shape. It's going to help keep your pizza round when you make it. I have some olive oil here. I'm just going to pour a little bit into the bottom of each container. Not much, maybe a 1/4 teaspoon or so. And I have a paper towel. I'm just going to use that to spread the oil around the inside of these containers. All right, finished. Now all we have to do is plop the dough into the containers. I do want to make sure that there is oil on all sides of these dough balls. So what I'll do, if they stick, you can use your dough scraper. They're not sticking actually now. I'm going to take this and I'm going to take the smooth side and put it down into my container first. I'm going to let it get some oil on it. And then I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to do the same with the other 2 balls. This is just going to ensure that there's some oil on the top of this ball to keep it from drying out, and oil on the bottom, obviously, to keep it from sticking. There you have it. That's the final step. Just going to pop these lids on. These are going to go in the fridge now. You could use these to make pizza right away. You're going to want to let them sit on the counter for probably about 2 hours to come up to room temperature and to prove a little bit longer. But it's going to be best if you just leave these in the fridge for about another day. You'd leave them up to 3 or 4 days. And when you're ready to use these, you just take them out of the fridge, set them on the counter while you're preheating your oven, and in about 2 hours, you'll have a dough ball that's ready to make pizza with. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it. Please subscribe. I'd appreciate that. And I have more videos coming for you soon. Next, we're going to be making these into delicious pizzas. Thank you.